The chapel smelled like lilies and lies. Evelyn Cross could taste both as she stood at the altar, her fingers trembling inside a bouquet of white roses she hadn't chosen. Everything about this day had been chosen for her. The dress, an ivory monstrosity with enough lace to drown in. The venue, her future mother-in-law's first choice, not hers. Even the vows had been pre-written by the officiant, words about obedience and devotion that made her stomach turn every time she rehearsed them. But none of that mattered now, because in exactly 4 minutes, she'd be Mrs. Adrian Locke. Safe, secured, saved from the wreckage of her father's failing business and her family's crumbling reputation. She could survive anything for 4 minutes. The organ swelled. 300 guests rose to their feet in a synchronized rustle of expensive fabric. Evelyn's father squeezed her arm so tight it hurt, his palms slick with desperate sweat. He hadn't looked her in the eye all morning. He couldn't. They both knew what this was. A transaction. Adrian stood at the altar in a tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than her childhood home. Tall, sharp-featured, devastatingly handsome in the way that came from generations of good genes and better money. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile perfectly practiced. He looked like every fairy tale prince she'd ever been told to want. He looked nothing like the man who'd called her adequate 3 weeks ago during an argument about the wedding cake. Evelyn's heels clicked against marble as she walked the longest aisle of her life. Each step felt like wading through concrete, faces blurred on either side. Adrian's corporate colleagues, his society friends, his mother's tennis partners, people who'd never spoken to her, who wouldn't remember her name tomorrow, who were here for the spectacle. She recognized almost no one. Her own guest list had been 14 names. His mother had cut it to 7. Balance, she'd said, as if Evelyn's entire existence needed to be trimmed down to fit Adrian's world. 30 feet from the altar, Evelyn caught Adrian's expression. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was staring at her with something that made her blood freeze in her veins. Not love, not even tolerance. It was the look someone gave a bad investment right before they cut their losses. 20 feet. His jaw tightened. 10 feet. His best man whispered something. Adrian's mouth curved into something cruel. 5 feet. Her father released her arm and stepped back. His duty done. Evelyn stood alone in front of the man she was about to legally bind herself to for the rest of her life. The officiant opened his book. The organ faded to silence. Adrian looked at her for one long, terrible moment. Then he turned to face the guests. "I can't do this," he said. The chapel inhaled as one. Evelyn's brain stuttered. She didn't understand. The words didn't make sense. They were supposed to be exchanging vows now, not... "I can't marry this," Adrian continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the chapel with the same confidence he used in boardrooms. He gestured at her like she was a PowerPoint slide he was dismissing. Look at her. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on Evelyn. She stopped breathing. "I tried," Adrian said, and he sounded almost apologetic. Almost. "I really did. I thought I could overlook the, obvious shortcomings. The family situation, the desperation, the way she's been clinging to this engagement like a life raft because we all know her father's drowning in debt." Someone gasped. Evelyn thought it might have been her. But standing here now, looking at... He waved his hand vaguely at her face. "I mean, she's done her best with the makeup and the dress, but you can't fix mediocre, can you? My mother was right." "I was being charitable. And charity isn't a foundation for marriage." The chapel was silent, except for the sound of Evelyn's heartbeat thundering in her ears. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "I deserve better than adequate," Adrian said, and he smiled, actually smiled, like he'd just delivered a punchline. "I deserve someone who brings something to the table besides debt and daddy issues." Laughter. Actual laughter rippled through the pews. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that Evelyn heard it echo off the vaulted ceiling. Enough that it crawled under her skin and burrowed into her bones. She stood there in her white dress that cost more than her car, holding flowers that were already wilting, and felt something inside her chest crack clean in half. Not her heart. Hearts broke softly, quietly, in private. This was something else. This was the sound of every lie she'd ever told herself shattering at once. That she was enough. That she mattered. that someone could want her for more than what she could provide. Adrian was already walking away. Just walking away. Down the aisle, past the guests who were standing now, murmuring, pulling out phones to record the aftermath. His best man followed. Then the groomsmen. A coordinated exit like they'd rehearsed it. Maybe they had. Evelyn's father appeared at her elbow, his face the color of old newspaper. "Evelyn, we can fix this. We can talk to him if we just..." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd spent the last 6 months negotiating her like livestock, who told her Adrian was a good match, who'd assured her that love would come later, that security was more important, the man who'd sold her to save himself. "Don't," she said. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Evelyn, please, the business, Adrian's family promised, if we can just apologize, if you can just, don't touch me." She stepped back. The bouquet fell from her hands, white roses scattering across marble like bones. The chapel was chaos now. Voices rising, people crowding the aisles, Adrian's mother shrieking something about embarrassment and contracts. Evelyn's vision tunneled. She couldn't breathe in this dress, couldn't think past the ringing in her ears. She needed out. She needed out. Evelyn ran. Not toward the exit where Adrian had disappeared, not toward the side door where her father was calling her name. She ran straight back down the aisle, through the mass of guests who parted like she was diseased, out the main doors and into the freezing November air. The venue was a mountain chapel, Adrian's choice naturally, perched on a ridge 40 miles from the nearest town. Scenic, isolated, perfect for a destination wedding, perfect for nowhere to run. Evelyn's heels hit gravel. She kept going, past the parked cars with their bows and just-married signs that now felt like mockery. The parking lot ended at a tree line, and beyond that, mountains. Real mountains, the kind that killed unprepared hikers every year. Behind her, voices. Her father, Adrian's mother. Someone yelling about her dress. Evelyn kicked off her heels and ran barefoot into the trees. The forest was dark, the canopy thick enough to block most of the afternoon light, pine needles bitten to her feet. Branches caught at her dress, tearing lace and tulle. She didn't care. She crashed through underbrush like a wounded animal, no destination in mind, just movement, just distance between herself and that chapel, just escape. The temperature dropped 10 degrees under the trees. Evelyn's breath came out in white clouds. She was wearing a sleeveless dress in November in the mountains because Adrian had insisted on fall foliage for the photos. She ran until her lungs burned, until the voices behind her faded to nothing, until the trees thinned and she stumbled out onto a rocky slope that dropped away into a valley she didn't recognize. That's when she felt the first snowflake, then another. Evelyn looked up. The sky had gone the color of old bruises, low and heavy with clouds that hadn't been there an hour ago. Snow fell faster, thick flakes that stuck to her hair and skin. The wind picked up, cutting through her dress like it wasn't even there. She should go back. She should turn around, find the chapel, face the humiliation, let her father drag her home and figure out what came next. She should do a lot of things. Evelyn walked deeper into the storm. She lost track of time somewhere between the first real shiver and the moment her feet went completely numb. The snow came down in sheets now, erasing the world. Evelyn couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The wind howled like something alive and furious, shoving her sideways every few steps. Her dress was soaked through, plastered to her skin, the fabric so heavy she could barely lift her legs. She'd stopped running a while ago. Now she just walked, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant feeling and feeling meant breaking. She wasn't ready to break yet. The ground disappeared beneath her without warning. Evelyn pitched forward, tumbling down an embankment she hadn't seen, rocks and ice and roots battering her body until she slammed into something solid at the bottom. Pain exploded through her shoulder. She lay there, gasping, tasting blood and snow. Get up. She couldn't. Get up! Evelyn's fingers scraped frozen ground, found a rock, used it to drag herself to her knees. Everything hurt. Her shoulder screamed. Her feet had gone past pain into nothing at all. The cold had teeth now, biting deep into her core. She was going to die out here. The thought arrived calm and certain, like a diagnosis. No panic, no fear, just fact. She'd run into a blizzard in a wedding dress with no supplies, no plan, no idea where she was. The storm wasn't going to stop. Night was coming, and she was alone. Completely, absolutely alone. Good, Evelyn said out loud, her voice cracking. Better this than going back. Better freezing than facing 300 people who'd laughed while Adrian destroyed her. Better dead than... A light cut through the snow. Evelyn squinted against the wind. There, maybe 50 yards ahead, barely visible through the whiteout. A flicker of orange. Fire? She stumbled toward it. The light grew stronger as she got closer, resolving into a window. No, 2 windows. A structure. A cabin, low and dark, crouched against the mountainside like it had grown there. Evelyn's legs gave out 10 feet from the door. She crawled the rest of the way, leaving a trail of torn lace and blood in the snow. Her fingers found rough wood. She tried to knock, but her hands wouldn't cooperate, so she just slumped against the door and waited for unconsciousness. The door opened. Evelyn fell inside, landing hard on wooden floorboards that felt like heaven compared to snow. Heat hit her like a wall. Actual heat, from an actual fire crackling in an actual stone fireplace. She lay there, shaking so violently her teeth clattered. Boots appeared in her vision, heavy, worn, practical boots attached to long legs and canvas work pants. A man crouched down, bringing his face into view. He looked like he'd been carved from the same rock as the mountains. Sharp jaw, hard features, eyes the color of winter storms. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His dark hair needed cutting. He was maybe 35, maybe older, hard to tell with the kind of weathering that came from years outdoors. He looked at Evelyn's wedding dress, her bare feet, her blue lips. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look sympathetic either. "You're not dead yet," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, carrying a faint accent she couldn't place. "So you've got a choice to make." Evelyn tried to speak. Nothing came out but a whimper. The man stood, walked to the fireplace, came back with a thick wool blanket that smelled like wood smoke and age. He dropped it on top of her without ceremony. "Choice is simple," he said, moving back to the fire where something was cooking in a cast-iron pot. "You can lie there and feel sorry for yourself until hypothermia finishes the job. Or you can get up, get out of those wet clothes, and fight to stay alive." He stirred the pot, his back to her. "I don't care which you pick," he added, "but decide fast. I'm not cleaning up a corpse tonight." Evelyn stared at the back of his head. Somewhere deep in her frozen brain, outrage flickered. This man, this complete stranger, was watching her die and acting like it was an inconvenience. "Well," he said without turning around, "you getting up or not?" Something hot and sharp cut through the cold in Evelyn's chest. Anger, fury actually, pure and clean and burning. She'd been humiliated, abandoned, laughed at, and left for dead in a blizzard. And now this asshole in the middle of nowhere was treating her like roadkill. Evelyn grabbed the edge of a chair and hauled herself upright. Every muscle screamed, her vision went spotty. She swayed, gripping the chair until the dizziness passed. The man still didn't turn around. "Bathroom's through there," he said, nodding toward a door. "There's hot water if you're fast. Clothes in the chest. Take what fits. Leave the dress." Evelyn opened her mouth to tell him exactly what he could do with his orders, but her jaw was shaking too hard to form words, and staying upright was taking all her concentration. She made it to the bathroom, barely. It was small, utilitarian, spotlessly clean. A metal basin sink, a water heater that looked military grade, a mirror that showed Evelyn exactly how close to dead she looked. Her lips were blue. Her skin was gray. Ice crystals clung to her hair. The dress had to be cut off. Her fingers were too numb to manage the tiny buttons down the back, so she used a straight razor she found on the shelf, sawing through silk and lace until the whole thing fell away in ruined pieces. Steam rose from the basin as she turned on the hot water. Evelyn stuck her hands under the stream and immediately regretted it. Pain exploded through her fingers as blood rushed back into frozen tissue. She bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, riding out the agony until it faded to manageable throbbing. The chest outside the bathroom held exactly what he'd promised. Clothes. Men's clothes, all of them, ranging from well-worn to ancient. Evelyn grabbed thermal underwear, thick wool socks, canvas pants with a drawstring waist, and a flannel shirt that hung to her knees. Everything was too big. Everything smelled like cedar and cold air. Everything was dry. When she emerged from the bathroom, the man was sitting at a rough wooden table near the fire, eating from a bowl. A second bowl sat across from him, steam rising. "Sit," he said. Not an invitation, a command. Evelyn's legs made the decision before her pride could object. She collapsed into the chair and pulled the bowl closer. Some kind of stew, meat and vegetables in a dark, rich broth that smelled better than anything she'd ever encountered. She ate. The man watched her for exactly 3 seconds, then returned his attention to his own food. They ate in silence, broken only by the crack of the fire and the howl of wind outside. Evelyn finished the bowl. The man refilled it without a word. She finished that too. Warmth was creeping back into her core, bringing pain with it. Her shoulder throbbed where she'd hit the embankment. Her feet felt like they were on fire. But she was alive. "Thank you," Evelyn said finally. The man looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "For what?" For, she gestured vaguely. "Saving my life?" He snorted. "Didn't save anything. You did that yourself by getting your ass up off my floor. You let me in. I opened a door. You want a medal?" Evelyn stared at him. He stared back, completely unbothered. "What's your name?" she tried. "Caleb Ridge." He didn't ask for hers. Didn't ask what she was doing in a wedding dress in a blizzard. Didn't ask anything at all. He just finished his food, stood, and started clearing the table. "Storm's going to last 3 days minimum," Caleb said, dumping dishes into the sink. "You're stuck here until it clears. Ground rules, you pull your weight. There's work that needs doing every day to keep this place running. Firewood needs splitting. Snow needs clearing. Supplies need organizing. You eat, you work. Clear?" Evelyn blinked. I don't know how to do any of that." "Then you'll learn." "I'm injured. My shoulder dislocated or broken." "I don't—" "Can you move it?" Evelyn tried. Pain lanced through her shoulder, but yes, she could move it. "Then it's not broken," Caleb said. "Might be sprained. You'll live. Ice it, rest it tonight. We'll see how it is tomorrow." "I need to contact someone. Let people know I'm alive. Do you have a phone, internet?" Caleb turned from the sink, his expression flat. "No phone, no internet, no radio. No way to contact anyone until the storm clears and you can hike back to civilization. But people will be worried. Then they should have worried before you ran into a blizzard in heels." The words hit like a slap. Evelyn felt heat rise in her face, anger or shame, she couldn't tell. "You don't know anything about what happened to me," she said. "Don't need to. You made choices, same as everyone. Now you're dealing with the consequences. I was humiliated, and you ran. Instead of standing your ground, instead of facing it, you ran straight into a storm that could have killed you." Caleb crossed his arms. "That's ego, not survival. You didn't run to save yourself. You ran because you couldn't stand being seen as weak." Evelyn shot to her feet, chair scraping against wood. "You have no right. I have every right. You're in my house, eating my food, wearing my clothes. You came here on the edge of death because you made stupid decisions driven by pride." His eyes were chips of ice. "You want sympathy? Wrong cabin? You want to survive? Then stop feeling sorry for yourself and start getting useful." They faced each other across the small room, tension crackling like the fire. Evelyn wanted to scream at him, wanted to defend herself, explain what Adrian had done, make him understand that running wasn't weakness, it was— What? What was it exactly? The fight drained out of her as fast as it had arrived. Evelyn sank back into the chair, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Every part of her hurt. Her shoulder, her feet, her pride. Her entire life. "I don't know how to be useful," she said quietly. "I don't know how to do anything." Caleb was silent for a moment. "Then tomorrow," he said finally, "you start learning." He pulled a sleeping bag from a storage bench and tossed it toward the fireplace. "You sleep there tonight where it's warmest. I'm upstairs. Don't touch anything. Don't go outside. Don't do anything stupid. We start at dawn." He headed for a ladder leading to what must be a loft. "Why are you helping me?" Evelyn asked. Caleb paused, one boot on the bottom rung. "I'm not helping you," he said. "I'm giving you the same choice I give every living thing that shows up half dead on my mountain. Fight or die. What you do with that is your own business." He climbed the ladder and disappeared into the darkness above. Evelyn sat alone by the fire, listening to the storm rage outside and the stranger moving around in the loft overhead. She pulled the sleeping bag closer, inhaling the smell of canvas and cold. 24 hours ago, she'd been a bride-to-be with a life mapped out in careful detail. Security, status, a place in society, even if it was bought with her dignity. Now she was wearing a stranger's clothes in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, with no way to contact anyone and no idea what came next. She should be terrified. She should be planning her escape, figuring out how to get back to civilization, back to her life, back to what? The chapel? Her father's desperate bargaining? The whispers and laughter and pity? Back to being the girl so worthless even her own groom couldn't fake it for one ceremony? Evelyn looked at her hands in the firelight. The perfectly manicured nails were broken and dirty. Her engagement ring was gone, lost somewhere in the snow probably. The tan line where it had been stood out pale against her skin. She didn't miss it. That should probably scare her more than it did. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. Upstairs, Caleb Ridge moved around with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been alone for a very long time. And Evelyn Cross, who'd spent her entire life trying to be what other people wanted, had no idea what came next. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than shame burning in her chest. She felt angry. And anger, she was learning, could keep you warm when nothing else could. Dawn came without warning, a gray light filtering through the cabin's small windows that did nothing to soften the cold. Evelyn woke to the sound of an axe striking wood, sharp, rhythmic cracks that cut through the howl of wind still battering the mountain. She sat up in the sleeping bag, every muscle in her body screaming protest. Her shoulder felt like someone had driven a spike through it. Her feet throbbed. Even breathing hurt. The fire had burned down to embers. The cabin was freezing. Through the window, she could see Caleb outside in the storm, splitting logs like the blizzard wasn't trying to kill him. He wore the same canvas pants from yesterday, a heavy coat, and nothing on his head. Snow accumulated on his shoulders faster than seemed possible. He didn't seem to notice. Evelyn watched him work for a full minute before she registered what was wrong with the picture. There was already a massive stack of split wood under a tarp beside the cabin. He wasn't running low. This wasn't necessary. He was just doing it anyway. The door banged open and Caleb came in with an armload of fresh logs, snow dusting off him as he moved. He didn't look at Evelyn as he rebuilt the fire with practiced efficiency. "Storm's worse than I thought," he said, feeding kindling to the coals. "We're snowed in hard. Could be 4 days, maybe 5. Evelyn's stomach dropped. 5 days? Or more, depends on when it breaks. The fire caught, flames licking up through the new wood. Caleb stood, brushing bark from his hands. "Get dressed. Real clothes in the chest. Second drawer. Boots by the door might fit if you use extra socks." "I can't wear the same." "Then freeze." He moved to the kitchen area, pulling out a cast iron skillet. "We've got work." "My shoulder. How's it feel?" Evelyn rotated it experimentally. The pain was still there, but duller, more of an ache than the sharp agony of last night. "Better. Still hurts." "Then it's healing. You'll work through it." He cracked eggs into the skillet, actual eggs from somewhere. "Get moving. Daylight's burning. It's barely light out." Caleb looked at her, his expression flat. "You want breakfast or not?" Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was injured, exhausted, that she'd nearly died 12 hours ago and deserved at least 1 day to recover. But her stomach was already growling at the smell of cooking eggs, and the look on Caleb's face made it clear that sympathy wasn't on the menu. She dragged herself out of the sleeping bag. The second drawer held actual winter gear, thermal layers, wool pants that were still too big but had a belt, a flannel shirt that didn't swallow her quite as much as yesterday's. The boots were men's size 10s, enormous on her, but with 3 pairs of socks they stayed on when she walked. By the time she finished dressing, Caleb had eggs and some kind of dense bread on the table. Coffee, too, strong enough to strip paint. They ate in silence. Evelyn kept expecting him to ask questions, where she was from, what had happened, why she'd been in a wedding dress, but he seemed completely uninterested in her backstory. He ate methodically, already thinking about whatever came next. "You know how to use an axe?" he asked, draining his coffee. "No." "Shovel?" "No." "Can you carry heavy things?" I don't know. Maybe? Caleb studied her for a moment. What can you do? Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. The honest answer was nothing. Nothing useful, anyway. She could plan seating arrangements, navigate social hierarchies, dress for any occasion, smile through conversations with people she hated. None of that mattered here. I can learn, she said finally. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite approval, but close. Then, let's see. The work started immediately. First, he taught her to maintain the fire, not just throwing logs on, but understanding airflow, coal placement, how to bank it at night so it lasted until morning. Evelyn burned her hand twice, learning the right distance to approach the flames. Caleb handed her snow to press against the burns without comment. Fire goes out, we die, he said. Simple as that. So you learn to respect it. Next came water. There was a system, melting snow in large pots, filtering it, storing it in containers. The pump outside was frozen solid, unusable until spring. Everything depended on snow and the metal collection system Caleb had rigged on the roof. Fill these, he said, handing her 2 empty 5-gallon containers. There's a drift on the north side that's clean. Pack it tight. You want density, not volume. Evelyn stared at the containers. Both of them? Both of them, every day. That's your job now. She wanted to argue that she couldn't, that she'd never done anything like this, that her shoulder hurt and her hands were already raw. But Caleb was already moving on to his next task, dismissing her before she could protest. The north side of the cabin was exposed to the full force of the wind. Snow whipped into Evelyn's face the moment she rounded the corner, stinging like needles. The drift was taller than she was, pristine white powder that sparkled in the weak morning light. She didn't have a shovel. Caleb hadn't given her one. Evelyn stared at the drift, then at the containers, then back at the drift. After a long moment, she dropped to her knees and started scooping snow with her bare hands. It took an hour to fill the first container. Her hands went numb after 10 minutes. Her shoulders screamed after 20. But she kept going, packing snow into the container layer by layer until it was full enough that she couldn't lift it. She'd overfilled it. Evelyn had to scoop some back out before she could even budge the thing. Then she half carried, half dragged it back around to the cabin door. Her arms shook. Her breath came in ragged gasps. When she finally got it inside, Caleb was at the table sharpening a knife. He glanced at the container. 1. That was it, just 1. Evelyn went back for the second. By the time she finished, her entire body was shaking from exhaustion. She collapsed on the floor beside the containers, too tired to even make it to a chair. Caleb set down the knife and came over. He looked at her hands, red, swollen, starting to crack from the cold and friction. Why didn't you use gloves? You didn't give me any. They're in the box by the door, same place I pointed out the boots. Evelyn could have cried. She'd spent 2 hours destroying her hands for no reason except her own failure to pay attention. Caleb pulled the first aid kit from under the sink and tossed it to her. Clean those cuts. Bandage anything that's bleeding. Then come help with food prep. He didn't apologize for not reminding her about the gloves. Didn't coddle her for making a stupid mistake. He just went back to his work, expecting her to handle herself. Evelyn wanted to hate him for it. Instead, she opened the first aid kit and started cleaning her damaged hands. The days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and repetition. Caleb wasn't cruel exactly. He didn't yell, didn't insult her, didn't seem to take any pleasure in her struggles. But he was absolutely relentless. Every task had to be done to his standard, and his standard was unforgiving. When she didn't pack the snow tight enough, he made her dump it and start over. When she stacked firewood wrong, he unstacked it and showed her once, just once, how to do it properly. When she tried to skip the morning's physical inventory of supplies because her shoulder hurt, he simply stopped cooking until she finished. You don't work, you don't eat, he said, not even looking up from the gun he was cleaning. That's how it works up here. That's cruel. That's reality. Food is finite. Energy is finite. You contribute or you die. The mountain doesn't care about your feelings. Evelyn lasted until noon before her hunger won out. She did the inventory, but it wasn't all grinding survival. There were moments, brief, unexpected moments, when Caleb showed her something that felt almost like teaching rather than just demanding. On the third day, when her hands were still bandaged and clumsy, he taught her to tie knots, Real knots, the kind that held weight and weather. He sat across from her at the table with a length of rope, his hands moving slowly enough that she could follow. "See how it loops back on itself?" he said, his rough voice almost gentle. "That's what gives it strength. It's not fighting against the pull. It's using the tension to tighten." Evelyn tried to copy the motion. Her first attempt fell apart immediately. Caleb didn't sigh or show frustration. He just undid his knot and started over, slower this time. Again, watch the crossing point. It took her 47 tries to get it right. She counted. When she finally held up a knot that didn't immediately collapse, Caleb examined it for a long moment. "Acceptable," he said. It was the closest thing to praise she'd gotten since arriving, and it shouldn't have mattered, but something warm flickered in Evelyn's chest anyway. The storm outside showed no signs of breaking. Snow piled higher against the cabin walls every day, drifts reaching halfway up the windows. The wind was a constant presence, howling and shrieking like something alive and furious at being denied entry. At night, Evelyn lay in her sleeping bag by the fire and listened to Caleb move around in the loft above. He slept less than seemed possible. She'd wake at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and hear him up there, doing something. She didn't know what. Organizing, maybe. Or just being awake because sleep was another luxury the mountain had taught him not to need. She never asked. On the 4th night, she woke to find him sitting by the fire, a book open in his lap. The firelight carved shadows across his face, making the scar through his eyebrows stand out like it had been drawn in ink. Evelyn sat up. "Can't sleep?" "Don't need much." She pulled the sleeping bag around her shoulders and moved closer to the fire. Her body didn't hurt quite as much anymore. The constant work was either killing her or making her stronger. She wasn't sure which yet. "What are you reading?" Caleb held up the book. Some kind of field guide to edible plants. "Memorizing?" "Reviewing." He turned a page. "Knowledge gets soft if you don't use it. Up here, soft knowledge gets you killed." Evelyn watched the fire for a while. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. She'd gotten used to his lack of small talk, the way he could sit for hours without feeling the need to fill the quiet. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer." "Why are you up here?" "Alone, I mean. No phone, no contact with anyone. This isn't just survival. This is isolation." Caleb was quiet for a long time, long enough that Evelyn assumed he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "People are complicated. Mountains aren't." "That's not really an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." He closed the book and stood, adding another log to the fire even though it didn't need it. "You should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be harder." "How is tomorrow different from any other day?" "Storm's going to break tomorrow night or the next morning, which means the day after, you're hiking out." The words hit Evelyn like cold water. She'd known this was temporary. Of course she had. But somewhere in the blur of work and exhaustion, she'd stopped thinking about what came next. Stopped thinking about the world beyond these 4 walls. "Already?" she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "You've been here 5 days. That's long enough to recover and learn some basics. Any longer, and people are going to start searching for you, if they haven't already. You need to get back before this turns into a manhunt." "I don't want to go back." The words came out before Evelyn could stop them. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since that first night. "Doesn't matter what you want," he said. "You can't stay here." "Why not?" "Because this isn't your life. This is hiding, and hiding isn't the same as choosing." "How would you know the difference?" Something dark flashed across Caleb's face. "I know." He climbed the ladder to the loft without another word, leaving Evelyn alone by the fire with the terrible certainty that he was right. She wasn't choosing this. She was running from something else. And 5 days of carrying water and stacking firewood hadn't changed that. The next day, Caleb's teaching shifted into something more intense. "If you're going back, you need to be able to handle yourself," he said over breakfast. "The world you left is going to try to make you soft again. People are going to push. You need to know how to push back." "I know how to handle people." "No, you know how to please people. That's not the same thing." He drained his coffee. "Get your boots. We're going outside." The storm had eased to a steady snowfall. The the wind dying down to something almost manageable. Caleb led her to a flat area behind the cabin where he'd cleared the snow down to bare ground. "Hit me," he said. Evelyn blinked. "What?" "You heard me? Hit me." "I'm not going to—" "Then you're wasting both our time." He crossed his arms. "Someone comes at you. Physically, verbally, doesn't matter. You need to know you can stand your ground. So hit me." Evelyn stared at him. This was insane. She wasn't a fighter. She'd never hit anyone in her life. "I don't know how." "Make a fist. Thumb on the outside, not tucked in. Now swing." She swung, telegraphing the movement so obviously that Caleb sidestepped it without effort. "Slower than my grandmother, and she's been dead 10 years. Again." Evelyn swung again. He blocked it with his forearm, barely moving. "You're pulling the punch before it lands. You're afraid of hurting me." He dropped his hands. "Why?" "Because I don't want to hurt you?" "Why not?" The question threw her. Because that's not how you treat people." "Even people who deserve it?" An image flashed through Evelyn's mind. Adrian at the altar, his smug smile as he destroyed her in front of 300 people. "Hit me like I'm him," Caleb said, reading her face. "Like I'm everyone who made you feel small. Like I'm every person who ever convinced you that being nice was more important than being respected." Evelyn swung. This time there was real force behind it. Caleb still blocked it, but she felt the impact shudder through her arm. "Better," he said. Again. They drilled for an hour, punching, blocking, footwork. Caleb was patient in a way that surprised her, breaking down each movement into components she could understand. When she started overthinking, he'd say, "Stop trying to do it pretty. Just do it." By the end, Evelyn's arms felt like lead, and sweat was running down her back despite the cold. But she'd landed 3 solid hits on Caleb's open palms, and each one had felt like cracking open a door she hadn't known was locked. "Enough," Caleb said finally. "You're not going to win a street fight anytime soon, but you'll make someone think twice. That's all you need." They walked back to the cabin, Evelyn's breath coming in white clouds. She felt different. Not stronger exactly, more solid, like she took up more space than she had that morning. Inside, Caleb made them both tea from some kind of pine needles he had drying in bundles near the ceiling. It tasted sharp and clean. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn asked, cradling the warm cup. "Training me, I mean. You could have just waited out the storm and sent me on my way." Caleb was quiet for a moment, staring into his tea. "I've seen what happens to people who go back before they're ready," he said finally. "They fold. World convinces them that what they survived wasn't real, that they're still the same person they were before, and they believe it because it's easier than changing." That sounds specific? It is. He didn't elaborate, and Evelyn didn't push, but she understood what he wasn't saying. He'd known someone who'd broken on this mountain, someone who'd learned to survive and then forgotten how the moment they returned to civilization. "I won't fold," she said. "Everyone says that. I'm not everyone." Caleb looked at her then, something calculating in his storm-gray eyes. "Prove it." He stood and walked to a cabinet, pulled out a rifle. Not a hunting rifle. Something military, dark, and efficient-looking. "You know how to shoot?" "No." "Then that's tomorrow's lesson." He set the rifle on the table between them. "Because if you're going back to face the people who broke you, you need to know what real power feels like. Not the kind someone gives you, the kind you take." Evelyn looked at the weapon, her reflection distorted in its dark metal. "I thought you said the storm was breaking." "It is, but we've got one more day. Maybe 2 if we're lucky." He sat back down, his expression serious. "I'm giving you a choice, Evelyn. You can leave here the same person who ran into that blizzard, hurt, angry, but fundamentally unchanged. Or you can leave here different, harder, someone who knows exactly what they're capable of. And shooting a gun is supposed to make me different? No, choosing to learn makes you different. The gun's just a tool." He leaned back in his chair. "Your whole life, people have told you what to be. Soft, pleasant, accommodating. Someone who makes others comfortable even when it costs you everything. I'm not going to tell you what to be, but I will show you what you could be if you want it badly enough." Evelyn's hands tightened around her cup. Everything Caleb said was true, in a way that made her chest ache. She'd spent 26 years being what other people needed. Dutiful daughter, perfect fiancé. Someone who apologized for taking up space. And where had it gotten her? Abandoned at an altar, laughed at, traded like property by her own father. She looked at the rifle again. "Teach me," she said. Caleb's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. "Tomorrow, first light. For now, get some rest. You're going to need it." That night, Evelyn lay awake long after Caleb had gone up to the loft. The fire crackled. Wind whispered against the cabin walls, gentler now that the storm was dying. In 2 days, maybe 3, she'd walk out of here. Back to her father's house, back to whispers and pity, back to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Unless she chose differently. Evelyn flexed her hands in the darkness, feeling the new calluses forming on her palms, the strength building in her fingers. 5 days ago, these hands had held a bouquet of white roses and shook with nerves. Now they could tie knots that held against strain, could stack firewood, could throw a punch, could pull a trigger. She wasn't the same person who'd stumbled into this cabin half dead and desperate. That woman had been soft, fragile, willing to accept humiliation if it meant survival. This woman, the one lying here in borrowed clothes by a fire she'd learned to maintain, in a body that ached from work instead of shame, she was something else. Not finished, not perfect, but different. And maybe different was enough. Outside, the storm finally began to break. Through the window, Evelyn could see patches of clear sky appearing between the clouds, stars visible for the first time in days. The mountain was letting her go. The question was whether she was ready to leave. The morning after Caleb promised to teach her to shoot, Evelyn woke before dawn to find him already outside. Through the window, she could see him setting up targets, rough boards propped against snowbanks at varying distances. His breath came out in white clouds as he worked, methodical and focused. She dressed quickly, layering the thermal clothing he'd shown her how to wear properly. Her body ached less than it had a week ago. The constant work was changing her, building muscle where there'd only been softness, creating calluses that protected instead of just marking damage. When she stepped outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world so white and pristine it hurt to look at. The sky was pale blue, cloudless, the kind of deceptive beauty that could kill you if you forgot how deadly the cold was. "You're late," Caleb said without turning around. "The sun isn't even up yet." Exactly, late. He finished securing the last target and walked back to where she stood. First rule of shooting, respect the weapon. It's not a toy, not a prop, not something you wave around to feel powerful. It's a tool that demands your full attention and will punish you for any lack of it. He handed her the rifle she'd used during the confrontation with Adrian's men. It felt heavier than she remembered, more real somehow in the morning light. Second rule, never point it at anything you're not willing to destroy. Doesn't matter if you think it's not loaded, doesn't matter if you're just practicing your stance. Muzzle discipline keeps people alive. Evelyn adjusted her grip, keeping the barrel pointed downrange like he'd taught her before. Good. Now shooting isn't about strength. It's about control, breathing, and understanding that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance with impersonal efficiency. Your body needs to absorb the recoil, not fight it. Feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. You're making yourself into a stable platform. They drilled the stance for 20 minutes until Evelyn's legs burned. Caleb was relentless, correcting the smallest shifts, making her hold the position until her muscles shook. "Why does this matter if I'm just pulling a trigger?" she finally asked, sweat running down her back despite the cold. "Because when adrenaline hits, your body defaults to training. If your stance is wrong, your shot goes wild. If your shot goes wild, you've just wasted ammunition and given your position away." He stepped back, evaluating her form. "Better. Now we add the breathing." The breathing exercise was harder than it sounded. Caleb taught her to time her shots to the natural pause between exhales, the moment when her body was most still. It took 47 tries before she could consistently hit that window. "Most people rush," he explained. "They get excited or scared and they pull the trigger as fast as possible. But rushing gets you killed. Calm gets you home." The sun had fully risen by the time he let her load actual ammunition. 5 rounds, carefully counted and inserted under his watchful eye. "That target there. He pointed to the nearest board, maybe 30 yards out. I want 5 holes in it. Take your time. Remember everything I taught you. Evelyn settled into her stance, feeling the weight of the rifle, the cold metal against her cheek. She focused on her breathing, finding that pause, that moment of stillness. The first shot cracked through the morning air, sharp and violent. The recoil kicked into her shoulder. She'd braced for it, but it still surprised her. The target was unmarked. Low and left, Caleb said. You tensed right before firing, anticipated the recoil instead of accepting it. She tried again, still missed. You're thinking too much. Stop trying to control everything and just let it happen. The third shot hit the board, splintering wood near the edge. Not center mass, but contact. There, Caleb said, something like satisfaction in his voice. Again. The fourth shot hit closer to center. The fifth hit dead center, right where she'd been aiming. Evelyn lowered the rifle, adrenaline singing through her veins. She'd done it. Actually hit what she was aiming at with a weapon designed to kill. How do you feel? Caleb asked. Powerful, she admitted. Is that wrong? No, that's honest. He took the rifle, began the process of cleaning it. Power isn't wrong. It's what you do with it that matters. Most people who feel powerless their whole lives, the second they get power, they use it to hurt others the way they were hurt. That's weakness pretending to be strength. And real strength? Real strength is having power and choosing not to abuse it, using it to protect instead of dominate, to create boundaries instead of crossing them. He worked oil into the metal with practiced motions. You're learning what you're capable of. What you do with that knowledge, that's the real test. They spent the next 3 hours drilling, loading, firing, cleaning, repeat. Caleb pushed her hard, never satisfied with good enough, always demanding better. When her shoulder started to bruise from the recoil, he showed her how to adjust her stance to minimize it. When her hands cramped from the cold, he made her work through it until her fingers learned to function despite the temperature. By midday, Evelyn could consistently hit targets at 50 yards. Not perfect, not expert level, but competent enough that Caleb nodded approval. You're a fast learner, he said, breaking down the rifle for storage. Most people take weeks to get where you are now. I'm motivated. That helps, but it's more than that. You're not fighting your instincts anymore. That first week, you second-guessed every move, apologized for taking up space, tried to make yourself smaller. He looked at her directly. You've stopped apologizing. Evelyn realized he was right. She couldn't remember the last time she'd said sorry for something that wasn't actually her fault. The constant apologies that had peppered her speech for 26 years had just stopped. Good, Caleb continued. Apologies are for actual wrongs, not for existing. The world tried to teach you that your presence was something to be excused. That was a lie. They walked back to the cabin in comfortable silence. The sun was high now, bright enough to make the snow almost blinding. Evelyn's body ached in new ways, her shoulder throbbing, her hands raw despite the gloves. But under the pain was something else. Satisfaction. The kind that came from pushing past limits and discovering there was more on the other side. Inside, Caleb made lunch while Evelyn cleaned her hands and tended to the bruising. The routine was familiar now, the division of labor, the quiet efficiency, the way they moved around each other without collision. Tomorrow we're going to work on something different, Caleb said, setting bowls of stew on the table. Hand-to-hand combat. Real fighting, not the lion she we did before. Evelyn's stomach flipped. Why? Because a gun isn't always the answer. Sometimes the threat is too close, too fast. Or you're in a situation where using a weapon would make things worse. He sat down across from her. And because you need to know that your body is a weapon too. That you don't need tools or permission to defend yourself. I don't know if I can hit someone, hurt someone. Caleb's expression was neutral. You already know you can. You proved it with those men. The question is whether you can do it intentionally, with control, when someone's coming at you with the intent to harm. That's different than shooting at distant targets. Yeah, it is. It's personal, intimate, messy. He ate without apparent concern. It's also necessary, because if Adrian or your father or whoever they send next gets close enough to grab you, you need to be able to break free. And breaking free means being willing to cause pain. The thought made Evelyn's stomach turn. Not because she was squeamish about violence, she'd learned that lesson already, but because fighting hand-to-hand meant getting close to someone, feeling their breath, their grip, their intention to hurt her. It meant being vulnerable while being dangerous. "I'll try," she said. "That's all I'm asking." That afternoon, Caleb disappeared into the loft and came back down with a worn duffel bag. He dumped the contents on the floor, pads, wraps, gear that looked like it had seen serious use. "I boxed," he said, answering her unasked question. "Before the military. Helped pay for college until I dropped out to enlist." He tossed her a set of hand wraps. "Put these on. I'll show you how." The wrapping process was complicated, designed to protect both the small bones of the hand and the wrist. Caleb's hands moved with muscle memory, binding his own wraps tight and secure. Evelyn fumbled through it 3 times before getting it right. "Good enough. Now, basic stance." He demonstrated, feet staggered, hands up protecting his face, weight balanced and ready to move. This isn't about looking tough. It's about protecting your vulnerable points while maintaining mobility. Evelyn copied his stance, feeling awkward and exposed. "Drop your shoulder. You're too tense. Fighting tight means fighting slow." He circled her, making small corrections. "Better. Now the jab. Fastest punch you've got. Not about power, about speed and creating distance." He showed her the motion, his wrapped fists snapping out and back in a blur. "Your turn." Evelyn tried. Her punch was slow, telegraphed, weak. Again. She punched again, and again, and again. Caleb drilled her on the jab for an hour straight, correcting her form, making her do it faster, sharper, with more intention. Her arms felt like lead by the time he called a break. "You're overthinking," he said, handing her water. "Your brain is trying to choreograph every movement. But fighting isn't choreographed. It's reactive. You need to train until the movements are instinct, not thought." That sounds like it takes years. It does to master. But you don't need mastery. You need competence. You need to be dangerous enough that someone thinks twice before grabbing you. He took a drink from his own bottle. Most attackers rely on victims freezing. They expect compliance. The second you fight back with actual skill, most of them bail. They want easy targets, not someone who might hurt them. And if they don't bail, then you hurt them anyway, harder, until they can't continue or you can escape. His voice was matter-of-fact. Violence isn't pretty or honorable. It's ugly and desperate, and whoever's willing to be more brutal usually wins. I'm teaching you to be brutal when you need to be. They resumed training. Caleb added the cross, then hooks, then combinations. He taught her where to aim: throat, solar plexus, knees, groin, the vulnerable points where even a weaker fighter could do serious damage. "Forget fighting fair," he said. "Fair fights are for sports. This is survival. You use every advantage you have: surprise, environment, viciousness. Someone grabs you, you go for eyes. They get you on the ground, you go for throat. There are no rules except win or lose." He made her practice on the heavy bag he'd suspended from a beam. Her knuckles split inside the wraps. Her shoulders burned. But she kept going, finding a rhythm, discovering that her body could deliver real force when properly aligned. "Good," Caleb said after she'd landed a combination that actually moved the bag. Again. By evening, Evelyn could barely lift her arms. Every muscle in her upper body screamed. Caleb made her stretch, working through the soreness, explaining that recovery was as important as training. "You're going to be hurting tomorrow," he said. "That's normal. Your body is adapting, building muscle, building tolerance." Building into what? Into someone who can handle whatever comes next. He started putting the training gear away. "You've got maybe another week before you need to make a real decision. Storm season's easing up. Roads will be passable soon. You can stay here and keep hiding, or you can go face what you ran from." "I thought you said hiding wasn't the same as choosing." "It's not, but neither is rushing back before you're ready." Caleb looked at her seriously. "Whatever you decide, you need to be solid in it. No second guessing, no wavering, because the moment you show doubt, people will exploit it." Evelyn sat with that while they ate dinner. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling, everything familiar now. But Caleb was right. This couldn't last forever. Eventually, she'd have to decide what came next. "How did you know?" she asked suddenly. "When you came up here 8 years ago. How did you know it was the right choice?" Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee. "I didn't," he said finally. I just knew everything else was the wrong choice. Staying in the city, taking the pills they wanted me to take, pretending I could be who I was before. All of it felt like dying slowly. Coming here felt like a chance to at least die on my own terms. He smiled without humor. Turns out I didn't die. I just learned to live differently. Do you regret it? The isolation? Some days? Most days? No. He looked at her. I'm not going to tell you what to choose, Evelyn. Your path isn't mine, but I will tell you this. Whatever you choose, make sure you're running towards something, not just away from something. Because running away keeps you a victim. Running towards something makes you the author of your own story. That night, Evelyn lay by the fire thinking about stories and choices and the difference between reacting and deciding. She'd run into the blizzard as a reaction, pure panic, pure escape. But everything since then had been different, learning to survive, learning to fight, learning to value herself. Those were choices. The question was what she'd choose next. The following days blurred into intensive training. Caleb pushed her harder than ever, combining everything he'd taught her, shooting, fighting, survival skills, into scenarios that tested her ability to think under pressure. He'd wake her in the middle of the night with simulated attacks, forcing her to react from sleep. He'd hide supplies and make her find them using only compass and terrain reading. He'd set up obstacle courses that required physical strength and problem solving. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready, he explained after she'd failed a drill for the third time. Threats don't announce themselves politely. You need to be able to function when you're tired, scared, and everything's going wrong. The worst was the cold water drill. Caleb had her break through the ice on a nearby stream and submerge completely, then get herself warm again within 15 minutes. The shock of the freezing water nearly stopped her heart. Getting her numb fingers to work the flint and start a fire seemed impossible, but she did it, with 4 minutes to spare. Why? She gasped, shaking violently as the fire finally caught. Why make me do this? Because now you know you can, Caleb said simply. You'll never doubt yourself again when conditions get hard. You've already survived worse. He was right. After the cold water drill, everything else seemed manageable by comparison. The pain, the exhaustion, the fear, all of it became just noise she could work through. On the 10th day after the armed men's attack, Caleb declared her ready. Ready for what? Evelyn asked. Whatever comes next. He handed her a pack already loaded with supplies. I'm taking you to the ranger station tomorrow like I promised. From there, you're on your own. But you're not the same person who ran into that blizzard 3 weeks ago. No, I'm not. So what are you going to do? Really? Evelyn had been thinking about it every night, turning the question over until she'd worn it smooth. She'd thought about disappearing, about confronting her father and Adrian, about a dozen different paths forward, but one answer kept rising above the others. I'm going to face them, she said, not because I owe them anything, not because I want closure or revenge, but because I need to look at the people who tried to break me and show them they failed. She met Caleb's eyes. And then I'm going to disappear on my own terms, not because I'm running, but because I'm choosing something better. Caleb smiled, real and warm. Good answer. That night, their last in the cabin together, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire listening to Caleb move around upstairs, packing his own gear for the journey tomorrow. So much had changed in 3 weeks. She'd arrived half dead, broken, convinced she was worthless. She was leaving strong, capable, certain of her own value in a way she'd never been before. And she was leaving alone. The thought hurt more than it should. Caleb had been clear from the beginning. This was temporary, a pause, not a life. But somewhere in the daily routines and hard lessons, she'd started to imagine something else. Some impossible future where they could build something together. But Caleb was right about running toward instead of running away, and attaching herself to him, to this mountain, to this cabin. That would be running toward safety instead of running toward herself. She had to do this next part alone. Around midnight, Caleb came down from the loft and sat beside her at the fire. Can't sleep either? She asked. Too much to think about. He stared into the flames. I've been alone up here for 8 years. I convinced myself I preferred it that way, that people were the problem and isolation was the solution. And now? Now I'm not so sure. He glanced at her. You made this place feel less like a prison and more like, I don't know. A home, maybe. Having someone to teach, someone to talk to, even someone to worry about. I forgot what that was like. You could come down with me. Not back to my old life, but somewhere new. We could... No. The word was gentle but firm. We couldn't, because you need to build your new life without me. Without anyone. Just you, figuring out who you are when no one's watching. He smiled sadly. And I need to figure out if I'm hiding up here, or if I genuinely choose it. Can't do that with you giving me reasons to leave. What if I want to come back after? Then you know where I am. Mountain's not going anywhere. He stood, offered her his hand. Come on, get some sleep. Tomorrow's a long walk and I need you sharp. Evelyn took his hand, let him pull her up. For a moment they stood close, the fire casting shadows across both their faces. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For the choice. For treating me like I was worth the effort. You always were. Caleb's thumb brushed across her knuckles, brief and warm. Now go prove it to everyone else. He released her hand and headed back to the loft, leaving Evelyn alone with the fire and the growing certainty that leaving tomorrow was going to be one of the hardest things she'd ever done. But hard didn't mean wrong. And she'd learned, these past weeks, that she was capable of hard things. She settled into her sleeping bag and closed her eyes, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and pine, memorizing the sound of the fire and the feel of safety, storing it all away for whatever came next. Tomorrow she'd leave the mountain. Tomorrow she'd face the world that had tried to break her. Tomorrow she'd find out if 3 weeks of survival training and hard lessons were enough to carry her through what came next. But tonight, she was still here, still safe, still becoming who she was meant to be, and that was enough. The sound of vehicles reached them 2 hours before the armed men appeared on the ridgeline. Evelyn was inside splitting kindling when Caleb came through the door fast, his expression sharper than she'd ever seen it. He grabbed the rifle from above the mantel and a pair of binoculars from the shelf, moving with the kind of economy that came from muscle memory. Get away from the windows, he said. Her stomach dropped. What's happening? Company. The kind that doesn't knock. He positioned himself at the side window where he could see without being seen. How bad do you think your fiancé wants you back? Ex-fiancé. And I don't know. Why? Because there are 5 vehicles coming up the access road, and they're not Rangers. Caleb adjusted the binoculars. Black SUVs, modified for mountain terrain. At least 12 men that I can count, maybe more. They're armed and they're organized. Evelyn's hands went cold. That doesn't make sense. Adrian wouldn't. He humiliated me. He doesn't want me back. Then someone does. Your father? She thought about it. Her father. Desperate enough to sell her off once, discovering she'd survived and disappeared. The scandal that would create. The business deals that would collapse without the Locke family connection. He'd try to salvage the engagement, Evelyn said slowly. Spin it as cold feet or a misunderstanding. Anything to keep Adrian's family from walking away completely. And Adrian would go along with it if his family told him to, or if there's something in it for him. Her voice hardened. He does what benefits Adrian, always. Caleb lowered the binoculars. They've stopped, setting up a perimeter about half a mile out. Professional formation. These aren't amateurs. He looked at her. This is going to get ugly. If you want to walk out there and go with them peacefully, now's the time. Evelyn stared at him. You think I should surrender? I think you should understand what you're choosing. These men are here to take you back, willing or not. If you fight, people might get hurt. Probably will. His gray eyes were steady on hers. Are you ready for that? 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been no. 3 weeks ago, she would have walked out with her hands up, apologizing for the inconvenience, trying to smooth everything over with compliance. But 3 weeks ago, she hadn't learned what her body could do when pushed, hadn't felt the solid weight of a rifle in her hands, or the fierce satisfaction of watching a target shatter from a shot she'd made, hadn't discovered that the rage burning in her chest could be shaped into something useful instead of swallowed down like poison. I'm not going back, Evelyn said. Caleb watched her for a moment longer, something like approval flickering across his face. Then we prepare. He moved through the cabin with rapid precision, pulling weapons from hiding places Evelyn hadn't known existed. A shotgun from under the floorboards, A handgun from behind a false panel, boxes of ammunition from a trunk that looked like it held blankets. "How many guns do you have?" she asked. "Enough." He handed her the rifle she'd been training with. "You remember everything I taught you?" "Yes." "Breathing? Slow and steady, squeeze the trigger, don't pull." "Leading a moving target? Aim where they're going, not where they are." Caleb nodded. "They're going to try talking first. Threats, probably. Promises. They'll say whatever they think will get you to come out quietly." He checked the load on the shotgun. "Don't listen. The second you start negotiating, you've already lost." A voice echoed across the snow, amplified by a megaphone. "Evelyn Cross, we know you're in there. We're here to bring you home safely. Your father is very worried about you." Caleb snorted. Subtle. Evelyn moved to the window, staying back in the shadows where they couldn't see her clearly. The men had spread out in a semicircle around the cabin's front approach, using trees and snowdrifts for cover. They wore tactical gear, black cold-weather clothing, boots made for this terrain. The one with the megaphone stood slightly forward, confident in his position. "Miss Cross, we don't want anyone to get hurt. We just need to have a conversation. Come out and we can resolve this peacefully." "They think you're alone," Caleb said quietly, "or with someone who won't fight. They're wrong on both counts." He moved to the back window. "I can get 3 of them from here before they adjust positions. You take the rifle, cover the front approach. Anyone moves toward the cabin, you put them down." Evelyn's mouth went dry. "You mean kill them?" "I mean stop them. Wound if you can, kill if you have to. These men are here to drag you back by force. They've made their choice. Now you make yours." Her hands tightened on the rifle. Everything in her civilized upbringing screamed that this was wrong, that violence wasn't the answer, that there had to be another way. But she thought about Adrian's smile as he destroyed her, her father's desperate bargaining, the 300 people who'd laughed. She thought about going back to that world, to being the woman who accepted humiliation as the price of survival. "What's the plan?" she asked. Caleb's smile was sharp and cold. "We make them regret coming up my mountain." The man with the megaphone tried again. "Miss Cross, we have a legal obligation to ensure your safety. Your father has filed a missing persons report. You're required to come with us for questioning." "Legal obligation my ass," Caleb muttered. "No badges, no uniforms, no jurisdiction this far into wilderness territory?" He settled into position at the back window. "Their private security. Probably told your father they could handle this quietly." "Adrian's family has connections," Evelyn said. "Money, lawyers. They could make this official if they wanted to." But they didn't, because official means questions, records, explanations. This is a snatch job dressed up as a rescue. He glanced at her. "You ready?" No, she wasn't ready. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her palms were sweating despite the cold. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to comply, to be the good girl who didn't cause trouble. But under the fear, something else burned, something hot and bright, and absolutely done with being told what to do. "Ready," Evelyn said. Caleb fired. The shot cracked through the afternoon air, sharp and final. One of the men behind the front line went down, grabbing his leg. Chaos erupted immediately. Men diving for cover, weapons coming up, voices shouting over each other. "Warning shot," Caleb called out, his voice carrying across the snow without the need for a megaphone. "Next one, center mass, get off my property." Return fire shattered the back window. Caleb dropped below the sill as glass exploded inward, already moving to a different position. He came up at the side window and fired twice more. 2 different screams. "Front!" he shouted. Evelyn swung the rifle toward the main approach. 3 men were advancing, using the tree line for cover. She picked the closest one, remembered her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The man stumbled, going down hard. She didn't know where she'd hit him and didn't have time to check. The other 2 were still coming. She fired again, missed. The men separated, flanking wider. Caleb saw them. Hold position. He moved past her in a crouch, grabbed something from under the sink, a flare gun. He fired it at an angle through the broken window, and the flare arced high before dropping into the woods behind the advancing men. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the snow erupted. Caleb had rigged the approach. Tripwires or pressure plates, Evelyn didn't know which, but when the flare hit its mark, 3 separate charges detonated. Not big enough to kill, he'd been specific about that during their planning, but loud enough and bright enough to disorient and scatter. The 2 men advancing on the front abandoned their approach, falling back to regroup. Avalanche risk, Caleb said, reloading. They know it now. Makes them cautious about where they step, where they shoot. Levels the field. The megaphone man tried again, his voice tighter now. You're making this worse for yourself. We have more men coming. You can't hold out forever. Don't have to hold forever, Caleb called back. Just have to hold longer than you can afford to stay. Weather's turning. Another storm coming in tonight. You really want to be stuck up here when it hits? Silence. The men were regrouping, reassessing. Evelyn could see them through the scope, clustered behind vehicles and trees, having urgent conversations. They're deciding whether we're worth the trouble, Caleb said. Rich men don't like uncertainty. They like clean operations with guaranteed outcomes. He glanced at the sky. And I wasn't lying about the weather. There's a front moving in. They've got maybe 3 hours before this mountain becomes impassable again. So we wait them out? That's option 1. He checked his ammunition. Option 2 is I circle around, cut off their vehicles, force them to retreat on foot. They'd never make it back to the main road before the storm hit. That's not forcing retreat. That's murder. That's survival. They came here armed, ready to take you by force. They made this what it is. His voice was hard. You want to play nice with people who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you? Evelyn looked through the scope at the men below. One of them was on a radio, probably calling for those reinforcements. Another was tending to the wounded. They weren't monsters. They were hired muscle doing a job, following orders from men with money who were used to getting what they wanted. But they'd still come here to drag her back to a life she'd rather die than return to. I don't want anyone dead, she said, but I'm not going with them. Caleb nodded slowly. Then we give them one more chance to leave. After that, we do what we have to do. He stood, making himself visible in the window. Immediately, weapons tracked toward him. But nobody fired. They wanted her alive, which meant they had to be careful about collateral damage. Last warning, Caleb shouted. Take your wounded and go. Leave the woman alone. She's not interested in your rescue. This doesn't concern you, Megaphone Man called back. We have no quarrel with you. Just send out Miss Cross and we'll be on our way. She is my quarrel, and she's not going anywhere. Movement from the vehicles. More men emerging. They'd had reserves waiting. Evelyn counted 8 new figures, all armed, spreading out to widen their perimeter. They're committing, Caleb said, dropping back down, which means someone's paying them enough to take the risk. He looked at Evelyn. How much is your father worth? He's broke. Everything depends on connecting to the Locke family. And Adrian's family? Millions. Maybe more. Then they're not leaving without you. You're too valuable. Caleb moved to the weapons cache, started pulling out items Evelyn didn't recognize. We're going to have to get creative. Over the next 20 minutes, he walked her through a plan that was either brilliant or insane. Probably both. It involved the terrain, the weather, and a fundamental understanding of how people with money thought about risk versus reward. They want you alive and undamaged, Caleb explained. That's their weakness. They can't risk a firefight that might hurt you, so we use that. He handed her a heavy winter coat. You're going to walk out there. What? Not to surrender, to draw them in close, get them focused on you, convinced you're giving up. He pulled on his own coat, started loading supplies into a pack. While they're watching you, I'm going to introduce them to what winter up here really means. Caleb, that's risky, yeah, but so is staying here and hoping they give up. He met her eyes. You trust me? Did she? This man who'd found her half dead and given her the choice to fight or die, who'd taught her that being soft was a choice, not a requirement, who'd shown her what she was capable of when she stopped apologizing for taking up space. Yes, Evelyn said. Then get ready. We move in 10 minutes. The preparation was meticulous. Caleb gave her a radio, showed her exactly how to use it, made her repeat the plan back to him 3 times. He marked routes on a hand-drawn map, indicated fallback positions, explained what to do if things went wrong. If I go down, he said, matter of fact, you run. North-northwest. Follow the ridgeline. There's another cabin about 8 miles out. Old ranger station. You can survive there until the storm passes. I'm not leaving you. You are if I tell you to. This isn't about loyalty or bravery. It's about survival. His expression softened slightly. I've been doing this a long time, Evelyn. But if something happens, I need to know you'll save yourself. Can you promise me that? She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him they'd both make it out or neither would, but she understood what he was really asking, for her to value her own life enough to preserve it, even at the cost of abandoning someone else. It was the hardest thing he'd taught her yet. I promise, she said. Caleb nodded. Good. Now let's go ruin these bastards' day. Evelyn walked out of the cabin with her hands visible and empty. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of orange and gold. The air had that peculiar stillness that came before a storm, a held breath quality that made every sound carry. 20 guns tracked her movement. That's far enough, Megaphone Man called. He'd abandoned the device now, standing in the open with more confidence. Miss Cross? Are you injured? No? Has this man hurt you? Threatened you? No. Then come with us. We'll get you somewhere safe, get you medical attention. I don't need medical attention. I need you to leave. Confusion crossed his face. Behind him, other men were emerging from cover, forming a loose circle. They thought they had her, thought she was surrendering. Miss Cross, I understand you've been through a trauma, but your family is worried. My father sold me to save his business. My fiancé humiliated me in front of 300 people and left me at the altar. Now you're here with guns, pretending this is a rescue. Evelyn's voice was steady, carrying across the snow. The only trauma I'm experiencing is you people refusing to accept that I don't want to be found. You don't know what you're saying. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in my entire life. That's when Caleb made his move. He came from the ridge above, silent as a ghost, using the terrain and the fading light to stay invisible until he was exactly where he needed to be. Evelyn didn't see him, couldn't see him. But she heard the first rumble and knew he'd succeeded. The men heard it too, heads turning, weapons swinging toward the sound. Too late. The snow gave way. Not a true avalanche. Caleb had been specific about that. Just enough to destabilize the slope above their vehicle position, sending a cascade of snow and ice down onto the SUVs. Not enough to bury them, just enough to disable 3 vehicles and scatter the men into a panicked retreat. In the chaos, Evelyn ran, not toward the cabin, toward the trees on the east side, exactly like Caleb had told her. Behind her, men were shouting, trying to regroup. Someone fired a shot, blind panic, not aimed. The sound echoed off the mountains, sharp and wrong. She reached the tree line and kept going, following the path Caleb had marked. Her breath came in white gasps. Her legs burned. But she was fast now, faster than she'd been 3 weeks ago, her body harder and more capable. The radio crackled. Status? Clear, Evelyn panted, moving to position 2. Good. Stay there. I'm coming around. More shots behind her, but distant now. The men were disorganized, trying to secure their position rather than chase her. They'd underestimated the terrain, underestimated Caleb, underestimated what someone was willing to do when cornered. They were learning. Evelyn reached the second position, a cluster of boulders that provided cover and a clear sight line back to the cabin area. She unslung the rifle and settled in, controlling her breathing like Caleb had taught her. Wait. There. Movement. 2 men trying to flank around to where they thought she'd gone. She tracked them through the scope, finger on the trigger. Could she do it? Could she actually shoot someone who wasn't immediately threatening her? The men moved closer. One of them said something into his radio. They were coordinating, getting organized again. Soon they'd have her position triangulated. Evelyn aimed low and fired. The shot kicked up snow 2 feet in front of the lead man. Both of them hit the ground, scrambling for cover. She fired again, deliberately missing, herding them back toward their starting position. I can hit you whenever I want, she shouted. Next time I won't miss. Go home. They retreated. Caleb's voice crackled over the radio. Nice shooting. How many rounds left? 4. Conserve them. I'm moving to the vehicle cluster. Going to make sure they can't follow when they finally give up. Be careful. Careful's for people who have something to lose. The radio went silent. Evelyn watched the chaos below. The men had regrouped near the remaining functional vehicles, clearly having an urgent debate about whether this job was worth the cost. The wounded from earlier were being loaded up. Voices carried on the cold air, angry and frustrated. The sky was darkening fast, the promised storm front moving in ahead of schedule. Wind picked up, carrying the first hints of snow. They were running out of time, and they knew it. Megaphone Man made one last attempt. "Miss Cross, we're leaving. But understand this. Your father has resources, legal options. This isn't over." Evelyn stood up, making herself visible on the boulder. "Tell my father I'm dead," she called back. "Tell Adrian I'm dead. Tell everyone I ran into a blizzard and didn't make it out. Give them closure, give them peace, but leave me alone." The man stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and gave orders. The men loaded up, engines starting, vehicles beginning the careful process of turning around on the narrow mountain road. They were actually leaving. Evelyn waited until the last vehicle disappeared around the bend before allowing herself to breathe. Her legs felt like water. She sat down hard on the snow, rifle across her lap, and tried to process what had just happened. She'd done it. They'd done it. Faced down armed men and won through nothing but terrain, tactics, and the sheer refusal to be taken. The radio crackled. "Evelyn, you clear?" "Yes, they're gone." "Good. I'm about 2 minutes from your position. Stay put." When Caleb appeared through the trees, he was carrying additional weapons and supplies stripped from the disabled vehicles. He looked her over, checking for injuries with the same efficiency he brought to everything. "You hurt?" "No." "You did good." He started walking back toward the cabin. "Real good. Most people freeze up the first time shots are fired. You kept your head." "I was terrified." "Terrified is fine. Terrified keeps you sharp. It's overconfident that gets you killed." He glanced back at her. "Come on. Storm's going to hit hard. We need to secure everything before it does." They spent the next hour preparing the cabin, boarding up the broken windows, reinforcing the door, moving supplies inside. Caleb worked with the calm focus of someone who'd weathered worse storms than this. As the first real snow began to fall, he built up the fire and made them both coffee. "They'll come back," he said, sitting across from her at the table. "Maybe not today, maybe not this winter, but they'll try again." "I know. And next time they'll be smarter, more prepared." "I know." Caleb studied her. "So what are you going to do?" Evelyn looked at her hands wrapped around the warm cup. These hands that had learned to tie knots, split wood, pull a trigger. Hands that belonged to someone different than the woman who'd stumbled into this cabin 3 weeks ago. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I know I'm not going back to who I was. That woman's dead. Let them bury her." Outside, the storm hit in earnest, wind howling around the cabin like something alive and furious. But inside, the fire burned steady, and for the first time since the altar, Evelyn felt something that wasn't fear or rage. She felt free. The second storm lasted 6 days. 6 days of wind that sounded like the mountain screaming, snow so thick you couldn't see 3 feet past the windows, cold that crept through every crack and seam despite the fire burning day and night. 6 days trapped in the cabin with nothing but time and the growing awareness that everything had changed. Evelyn spent those days learning what it meant to truly live instead of simply survive. Caleb taught her to read the weather by watching the sky's color, the way the wind shifted, how the birds behaved in the brief moments when the storm eased. He showed her which plants could be eaten and which would kill you, how to preserve meat without refrigeration, how to make tools from things most people would throw away. Not because she needed to know right now, but because knowledge was survival and survival was freedom. "Most people think freedom means having choices," he said one evening while they were cleaning rifles by firelight. "But real freedom is not needing anyone else to give you choices in the first place." Evelyn ran the cleaning rod through the barrel, the motion automatic now. "That sounds lonely." "It is, sometimes." Caleb didn't look up from his work. "But loneliness is just the price you pay for not being owned." "Is that what you think relationships are? Ownership?" "Most of them, yeah. People trade freedom for security, independence for belonging. They call it love, but it's really just fear dressed up pretty." "That's cynical." "That's experience." He set down the rifle, reached for another. You were about to marry someone who thought he owned you, who humiliated you because you weren't performing the role he'd assigned. That's not love. That's ownership. Evelyn wanted to argue but couldn't. Everything he said was true in a way that made her chest tight. She'd spent 26 years trying to be what others needed, and the moment she failed to perform adequately, she'd been discarded like a broken appliance. "So what's the alternative, Whiteboy?" she asked. "Never trust anyone, never let anyone close?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on the metal. "The alternative," he said finally, "is finding someone who makes you bigger instead of smaller. Someone who doesn't need you to be less so they can be more." He looked at her then, something raw in his gray eyes. "But those people are rare, and most folks aren't willing to do the work required to be that person for someone else." The firelight cast shadows across his scarred face, and Evelyn realized with sudden clarity that Caleb Ridge knew exactly what he was talking about. Someone had broken him once, broken him so thoroughly that he'd rebuilt himself into something that couldn't be broken again. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "Same thing that happened to you. I trusted the wrong person and paid for it." He went back to cleaning the rifle. "Difference is, I learned. You're still learning. And if I don't want to end up like you, alone on a mountain, trusting no one, then you find a different path. But you do it with your eyes open, not because someone convinced you that being alone is worse than being owned." The conversation stayed with Evelyn through the long nights that followed. She lay in her sleeping bag, listening to the storm and thinking about paths, about choices, about the difference between solitude and loneliness, about whether it was possible to be close to someone without giving them the power to destroy you. On the 7th day, the storm finally broke. Evelyn woke to silence, real silence, not just a lull between wind gusts. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the boarded windows, bright enough to hurt. She sat up and found Caleb already awake, standing at the door with it cracked open, looking out at the transformed landscape. "It's over," he said. The world outside was buried under 4 feet of fresh snow, pristine and blinding white. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only happened after major storms, so clear it looked unreal. The temperature had dropped even further, the kind of cold that would kill an unprepared person in hours. But Evelyn wasn't unprepared anymore. "How long until they can get back up here?" she asked, pulling on layers. "Week, maybe 2. Roads are impassable right now. They'll need heavy equipment to clear them." Caleb let the door swing shut. "But eventually they'll come. Or someone will. Your father's not going to give up, and Adrian's family has too much invested to walk away." "So what do I do?" "That's your choice. Stay up here and fight every time they send people. Go back down and face them on their terms. Or find a third option." "What's the third option?" Caleb walked to the cabinet, pulled out a weathered topographical map, and spread it on the table. His finger traced routes through mountain ranges, across wilderness areas, to small dots marking isolated communities. "There are places," he said, "where people go when they don't want to be found. Towns so small they're not on most maps. Communities that value privacy over connection, places where asking someone's real name is considered rude." His finger stopped on a cluster of dots in what looked like northern wilderness. "You could disappear. Actually disappear, not just hide. Start over with a new name, a new life. Run away. Relocate strategically." He looked at her. "You've already died once in everyone's minds. The woman who ran into a blizzard and never came back. You could let that story be true. Let Evelyn Cross stay dead and become someone else entirely." The idea should have terrified her. Abandoning her identity, her past, everyone she'd ever known, starting from nothing in a place where no one knew her history. Instead, it felt like possibility. "And you?" she asked. "Would you come with me?" Caleb's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it down. "I don't leave the mountain." "Why not?" "Because this is where I know the rules. This is where I'm useful." He folded the map carefully. "Out there, I'm just another damaged person trying to pretend they're not broken. Up here, being broken doesn't matter." "You're not broken." "Yeah, I am. We both are. Difference is, I've accepted it." He handed her the map. "You still think you can be fixed." "Can I?" "I don't know, maybe." Caleb turned away, started organizing supplies with the methodical focus he used when emotions got too close to the surface. But you won't find out up here. This mountain isn't a life. It's a pause. Eventually, you have to decide what comes after. Evelyn stared at the map in her hands, at the tiny dots representing places where she could restart, rebuild, become someone new. The smart choice was obvious. Disappear before anyone came looking again, before her father or Adrian or whoever they sent next managed to drag her back. But something in her resisted the idea of running again. She'd run once, into a blizzard, choosing death over humiliation. That choice had saved her life, but it had also been the choice of someone with no other options, someone so desperate she'd trade anything for escape. This would be different. This would be choosing a direction instead of just fleeing. "I need to go back," she said. Caleb turned, surprise clear on his face. "What?" "Not to stay. Not to go back to my old life. But I need to face them. My father, Adrian, all of it." She set the map down. "If I run now, I'll always be running, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if someone's going to find me. I need to end this on my terms." "That's a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Caleb crossed his arms, his expression hard. "You go back down there. You're giving them another chance to break you. And they will try. They'll use guilt, obligation, every psychological weapon they have. Your father will cry. Adrian will apologize. They'll make promises, tell you what you want to hear. I know. And you think 3 weeks on a mountain makes you strong enough to resist that?" "No." Evelyn met his eyes. "But 3 weeks with you taught me that I don't have to resist. I just have to refuse. There's a difference." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite pride, but close. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, then we do this smart." He pulled the map back out, along with several others. "You're not going alone. I'll get you within range of civilization. Make sure you can get to wherever you need to go safely. After that, you're on your own." "You'd leave the mountain for that?" "I'd leave the mountain to make sure you don't get killed doing something brave and stupid." He traced a route on the map. "There's a ranger station about 15 miles northeast. Should be manned this time of year. We get you there. You can make calls, arrange transportation, whatever you need. But we move fast and we move careful. Those men might have left, but they could have surveillance up, someone watching for you to emerge." "How long will it take?" 2 days if the weather holds and you can keep pace. Maybe 3. He looked at her worn boots, her borrowed clothes. "You're tougher than you were, but this is different terrain than around the cabin. Longer distances, colder nights. You up for it?" Every reasonable part of Evelyn wanted to say no. 2 days hiking through winter mountains with the possibility of armed men hunting her sounded like a nightmare. But she'd already survived worse. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light. Today we prepare." Caleb started pulling gear from storage. "You're going to need proper equipment, and we're going to practice cold weather protocols until you can do them in your sleep." They spent the rest of the day in intensive preparation. Caleb outfitted her with real winter gear, insulated layers, waterproof outer shell, boots designed for extreme cold. He taught her to pack a survival kit, to build an emergency shelter, to start a fire with wet wood. He drilled her on compass navigation, on reading terrain, on what to do if they got separated. "If something happens to me," he said, showing her the map for the 10th time, "you follow this route. Don't deviate, don't take shortcuts. The terrain here looks easy, but it's unstable. People die because they think they know better than the map. Nothing's going to happen to you. Probably not, but probably isn't good enough in winter." He made her trace the route with her finger, naming landmarks until she could do it from memory. "Promise me you'll stick to the plan." "I promise." That night, neither of them slept much. Evelyn lay by the fire listening to Caleb moving around upstairs, organizing supplies, preparing for the journey. At some point in the small hours of the morning, she heard him come down the ladder and move to the window. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. "Never could the night before heading out." He stayed at the window, a dark silhouette against the starlit snow. "Too many variables, too many things that could go wrong." Evelyn sat up. "You don't have to do this. I can find my way." "No, you can't. Not safely." He turned to face her. "And I made a choice when I opened that door 3 weeks ago. I don't abandon people halfway through." "Is that what this is? Following through on an obligation?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "It stopped being obligation about 2 weeks ago." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Evelyn stood, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and crossed to where he stood. Then what is it? I don't know, but it's not nothing. He looked at her, his scarred face shadowed and uncertain. You're going to leave. You're going to go back down there and deal with your demons, and then you're going to disappear into whatever life comes next. And that's the right choice. But it doesn't mean I have to like it. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, something warm and terrifying. You could come with me, after. Not back to my old life, but to wherever I go next. I can't. Why not? Because I barely function up here, where everything makes sense. Out there, with people and expectations and all the complicated shit that comes with civilization, I'd be useless to you. Worse than useless. You're not useless. You don't know that. You've only seen me here, in my element. You haven't seen what I'm like when the world gets too loud and too complicated and I can't. He stopped, jaw tight. I came up here for a reason, and that reason hasn't changed. Evelyn reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she took his hand. What happened to you? Caleb looked down at their joined hands like he wasn't sure how they'd gotten there. I was military, he said quietly. Did 3 tours, came back with more problems than solutions. The VA tried to help, but I wasn't fixable the way they understood fixing. Had a fiancé who tried to stick it out, but eventually realized she'd signed up for someone who didn't exist anymore. His thumb moved against her palm, restless. I hurt her. Not physically, but I hurt her by being someone she couldn't reach, no matter how hard she tried. So she left. And I came here because at least on the mountain, being unreachable is an advantage instead of a failing. How long have you been up here? 8 years, give or take. And in 8 years, you never thought about leaving? Every day? And every day I remember why I can't. He pulled his hand away gently. You should sleep. We've got a hard journey tomorrow. He went back up to the loft before she could respond. Evelyn stood alone by the window, looking out at the starlit snow and thinking about the difference between can't and won't. About whether Caleb really believed he couldn't function in the world, or whether he just decided it was easier not to try. But she didn't push, because she understood, in a way she couldn't have 3 weeks ago, that some wounds ran too deep for pushing. Some people had to decide for themselves when they were ready to heal, if they ever were. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that looked beautiful and could kill you if you weren't prepared. They set out just after sunrise, packs loaded with supplies, weapons within easy reach. Caleb moved through the snow like he'd been born to it, his stride efficient and tireless. Evelyn followed, using the techniques he'd taught her to conserve energy and maintain pace. The first day was brutal, not because of the distance or the cold, but because every muscle Evelyn had built over 3 weeks was being used in different ways. Hiking wasn't splitting wood or carrying water. It required sustained effort, constant adjustment to terrain, the mental discipline to keep moving when everything hurt. By midday, she was ready to collapse. Break, Caleb called, stopping at a cluster of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind. 15 minutes. Eat, hydrate, check your feet for hot spots. Evelyn collapsed onto a boulder and pulled out the food he'd packed. Dense bread, dried meat, nuts. Fuel more than flavor. How am I doing? She asked between bites. Better than expected. You're keeping pace, managing your energy. He scanned their back trail, always watching. We're making good time. If it holds, we'll reach the first waypoint before dark. And if those men are watching, then we deal with it. He pulled out binoculars, glassed the terrain ahead. But I don't think they are. Storm was too severe, came too fast. They probably barely made it back to town before the roads closed. They're not thinking about surveillance right now. They're thinking about getting warm and explaining to their boss why they failed. What if they come back? They might, but by then you'll be long gone. He lowered the binoculars. One way or another, this ends in the next few days. They hiked until the light started to fade. Then Caleb found a sheltered spot among a stand of evergreens and showed Evelyn how to set up their emergency camp. They dug out a snow cave, insulated it with pine branches, got a small fire going in a pit that wouldn't show light from a distance. It was cramped and cold, and nothing like the cabin's comfort. It was also the most alive Evelyn had ever felt. They ate in silence, shoulders touching in the confined space, watching the fire dance. Outside, the temperature dropped toward lethal, but in their small shelter, wrapped in layers and survival knowledge, they were safe. Tell me about after, Caleb said suddenly. When you face them, what's your plan? Evelyn had been thinking about it for days, turning the scenario over in her mind until she'd worn it smooth. I'm going to find my father first, alone, before he can hide behind lawyers or Adrian's family. I'm going to tell him exactly what he did wrong, how he failed me, why I don't owe him forgiveness or reconciliation or another chance. She poked at the fire. Then I'm going to Adrian's family, not Adrian. He doesn't matter anymore. But his parents, his mother especially. I'm going to make it clear that any further attempts to find me, contact me, or interfere with my life will result in a very public, very detailed accounting of exactly what happened at that wedding. Blackmail. Leverage. She met his eyes. You taught me that power isn't given, it's taken. So I'm taking it. And after? After I disappear. New city, new name, new life. I'll use the skills you taught me to build something that's actually mine. She smiled, small and fierce. And I'll never apologize for taking up space again. Caleb studied her for a long moment, firelight reflecting in his gray eyes. You're going to be okay, he said quietly. I know. No, I mean really okay. Not just surviving, actually living. Something soft crossed his expression. I wasn't sure at first, but yeah, you're going to make it. They sat in comfortable silence until the fire burned low, then banked it carefully and settled in for sleep. The space was so small they had to sleep close, sharing warmth. Evelyn felt Caleb's breath on her hair, his solid presence at her back. She should have felt uncomfortable, should have felt vulnerable. Instead, she felt protected. And sometime in the deep hours of the night, when the cold was at its worst and the wind howled outside their shelter, she felt his arm come around her waist, pulling her closer to his warmth. She didn't pull away. Neither of them spoke. Neither acknowledged what was happening. But something shifted between them in that darkness, some understanding that didn't require words. Morning came too soon and too bright. They broke camp efficiently, buried all evidence of their presence, and continued northeast. The second day was easier than the first. Evelyn's body had adjusted to the demands. Her mind had found the rhythm. She and Caleb moved like a unit, communication reduced to hand signals and shared understanding. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from a valley below. The ranger station. Civilization. That's it, Caleb said, lowering the binoculars. You'll be safe there. They'll have communications, can get you wherever you need to go. Evelyn stared at the distant smoke and felt her stomach knot. This was it. The moment where her mountain sanctuary ended and real life began again. Come with me, she said, not looking at him. Just to the station. You don't have to stay, but... Evelyn? I know what you're going to say, but I'm saying it anyway. Come with me. Caleb was quiet for a long time. If I come down there, he said finally, I'll want to stay. I'll want to follow you wherever you go next, try to be part of whatever life you build. And eventually I'll fail at it because I'm not built for that world anymore. I'll let you down and you'll resent me for it and everything will end badly. You don't know that. I do. I've lived it before. He turned to face her. You're going to do amazing things. You're going to be amazing, but you need to do it without me holding you back. You wouldn't hold me back. I would, because you'd try to fix me instead of building yourself. And I'm not worth fixing, but you're worth building. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with unexpected gentleness. So I'm going to give you the same choice I gave you that first night. You can stay here, on this mountain, safe but stagnant, or you can go forward into something uncertain and difficult and potentially incredible. But you can't have both. Tears stung Evelyn's eyes. That's not fair. No, it's not. His voice was rough with something that might have been grief. But it's real. And real is what you need right now, not fair. They descended toward the ranger station in silence, the weight of ending pressing down on them both. With each step, Evelyn felt the mountain releasing its hold. The air got easier to breathe, the landscape less severe, the world less binary. It should have felt like relief. It felt like loss. The ranger station was a sturdy building with a satellite dish and actual roads leading away from it. A park service truck sat outside. Through the windows, Evelyn could see people moving around, normal people doing normal work in a normal world. She stopped at the tree line, suddenly unable to take the last steps. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Yes, you do." Caleb pulled off his pack, pulled out a small bag she hadn't seen him pack. "Here, everything you'll need. Cash, a phone that's not connected to your old life, contact information for people who can help you start over. No traces back to me or the mountain." Evelyn took the bag with shaking hands. "When did you prepare this?" "The night you decided to go back and face them. I knew you'd need it." He hesitated, then pulled off a small compass from around his neck. "And this? So you can always find north, no matter where you end up." The compass was worn smooth from years of use, the brass warm from his body heat. Evelyn closed her fingers around it. "Caleb, don't." His voice was rough. "Don't make this harder than it is. Just go. Walk down there, start your life, and don't look back." "Will I ever see you again?" He smiled, sad and small. "I don't know. Maybe. If you end up needing the mountain again." He stepped back, creating distance. "But I hope you don't. I hope you build something so solid and strong that you never need to run again." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to refuse to leave, to demand he come with her, to rage against the unfairness of finding someone who understood her, only to lose them to a mountain and old wounds. But she understood, in the way that pain teaches understanding, that some people couldn't be saved by wanting them enough. Some people had to save themselves. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking, "for everything, for the choice, for teaching me I was worth fighting for." "You always were. You just needed to remember." Caleb took another step back. "Now go, before I change my mind and convince you to stay." Evelyn forced herself to turn, to walk out of the trees and toward the ranger station, to cross the threshold from wilderness to civilization with her head up and her shoulders back. She didn't look behind her, but she felt him there, watching until she was safe inside. And when she finally turned to look back through the window, the tree line was empty. Caleb Ridge had vanished back into his mountain, taking whatever they might have been with him. The ranger station was warm and bright and full of concerned people who immediately tried to help the woman who'd appeared out of the wilderness in borrowed clothes and haunted eyes. They offered food, blankets, medical attention, questions phrased gently about where she'd come from and whether she needed rescue assistance. Evelyn answered carefully, telling them enough to satisfy without giving details. A hiking accident, got separated from her group, survived in an emergency shelter until the storm passed. No, she didn't need medical attention. Yes, she knew how lucky she was. They accepted her story because it was easier than pushing. She used their phone to make 2 calls. The first was to her father's office. His secretary answered, professional and cool. "This is Evelyn Cross. I need to speak with my father." Shocked silence. Then, "Miss Cross, everyone thought you were—" "I'm fine, put him on." More silence, clicking as the call transferred. Then her father's voice, shaking and desperate. "Evelyn? Oh, thank heaven, I've been so worried. The search parties couldn't find any trace, and Adrian's family has been—" "I'm calling to tell you I'm alive," Evelyn cut him off, "and that I won't be coming home. Not now, not ever." "What?" "Evelyn, you can't be serious. You've been through trauma. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." "You tried to sell me to save your business. You let Adrian humiliate me because you were more worried about deals than dignity. You were ready to hand me over to armed men rather than accept that I chose to leave." Her voice was steel. "I'm done. With you, with Adrian, with all of it. Consider me dead if it makes things easier." "Evelyn, please. I'm your father." "No. A father protects his daughter. You auctioned me off to the highest bidder. We're done." She hung up before he could respond. The second call was to Adrian's family home. His mother answered, her voice dripping with false concern. "Evelyn, dear, where are you? We've been so worried. I'm alive, Mrs. Locke, and I'm giving you one chance to walk away cleanly." Evelyn kept her voice pleasant, conversational. "You sent armed men to drag me off a mountain. That's kidnapping, assault, a dozen other crimes. I'm willing to keep that quiet if you agree to leave me alone permanently." I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And we both know I could make this very public, very embarrassing. The jilted bride who your son humiliated, hunted down by private security. Think about what that would do to your family's reputation. The false concern evaporated. You're threatening us? I'm offering you a deal. Forget I exist and I'll forget what you did. Keep coming after me and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of family the Locks really are. Evelyn smiled into the phone. Your choice, Mrs. Locke, but choose fast. Silence. Then, you've changed. Yes, I have. Fine. You have our word. Just stay away from Adrian. He's moved on anyway. I'm sure he has. Give him my congratulations on finding someone more adequate. She hung up. It was done. The Rangers offered her a ride to the nearest town. She accepted, throwing her borrowed pack in the back of their truck and climbing in without looking back at the mountains. The town was small, the kind of place that existed because it always had, not because it served any real purpose. Evelyn used Caleb's cash to get a room in a motel that smelled like pine cleaner and old cigarettes. She showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing away 3 weeks of mountain dirt and discovering the person underneath. She looked different, leaner, harder, with new scars on her hands and a set to her jaw that hadn't been there before. Her eyes were different too, clear and direct instead of downcast and apologetic. This was who she was now. Evelyn Cross, who died in a blizzard. What came next needed a new name. She spent 3 days in that town, using Caleb's contacts to arrange new identification. A new name, a new beginning. It was easier than it should have been, which made her wonder how many other people had walked this same path. How many had needed to die to their old lives to start actually living. The woman at the forgery office, a tired-looking 50-something who worked out of a converted garage, handed her the documents without judgment. What name you want? She asked, fingers poised over a keyboard. Evelyn thought about it. About who she wanted to become. About the woman she'd been discovering on that mountain. The one who didn't apologize, who didn't shrink, who took up space without permission. Morgan, she said. Morgan West. The woman typed. Birth date. Evelyn gave her a date 6 months different from her real one. Close enough to remember, different enough to matter. Address? I don't have one yet. Then we'll use a P.O. box until you do. The woman looked up, her eyes sharp and knowing. You running from something dangerous or something stupid? Neither. I'm running toward something better. The woman smiled, the first real emotion she'd shown. Good answer. Give me 24 hours. Evelyn spent that night in the motel room planning her next moves. She had cash, enough to live on for a few months if she was careful. She had skills now, survival training, basic self-defense, the kind of practical knowledge that could translate to dozens of jobs. And she had something more valuable than either of those things. She had certainty. She knew who she was, what she was worth, what she wouldn't tolerate. That was worth more than any amount of money. On the 4th day, she bought a bus ticket to a city she'd never been to, in a state where no one knew her name. She packed the few things she owned, Caleb's compass, his lessons, her new identity, and walked to the bus station with her head high. The bus driver barely glanced at her ticket. Where you headed, miss? North, Morgan said, as far as this route goes. She found a seat in the back and watched the town disappear through the window, watched the mountains fade into the distance, snow-capped peaks holding secrets and survival, and one man who'd taught her the difference between existing and living. She didn't cry, but she held the compass tight in her hand, feeling its weight, its warmth, its promise that she'd always know which direction to go. The city she chose was called Ridgemont, a mid-sized place nestled in the foothills where winter was serious but survivable. It had outdoor culture, hiking trails, the kind of community where someone with mountain skills could find work without questions. Morgan rented a tiny studio above a hardware store, paying 3 months up front in cash. The landlord, an older man with kind eyes and calloused hands, didn't ask for references. You look like you know how to take care of things, he said, handing her the keys. That's good enough for me. She spent the first week just walking the city, learning its rhythms, finding where she belonged. The outdoor supply shops downtown were her first stops. She knew that world now, could speak its language. When she walked into Summit Gear on a Tuesday morning and saw the Help Wanted sign, she didn't hesitate. The manager was a woman in her 40s named Kate, weathered and competent looking. You have retail experience? Kate asked, looking over the sparse resume Morgan had created. No, but I have field experience. I can tell people which gear will actually keep them alive versus which gear just looks good in photos. Kate's eyebrows rose. Confident, I like that. What's your background? Spent the last month living off-grid in winter conditions. Learned cold weather survival, navigation, emergency protocols. I know what works because I've used it. Where'd you learn all that? From someone who knew what he was doing. Morgan met Kate's eyes. I'm not going to pretend I have years of experience, but I'm a fast learner. I show up on time, and I don't quit when things get hard. Give me 2 weeks to prove it. Kate studied her for a long moment. You got a place to stay? Studio on 5th. References? None that I can use. Running from something? Running towards something. Kate smiled. All right, 2 weeks, like you said. But if you're half as tough as you sound, you'll do fine. Start Monday. Morgan walked out of that shop with a job, a future, and the growing certainty that she could actually do this, build a life from nothing, become someone new. The work was easier than mountain survival, but harder than being decorative at society functions. She learned inventory systems, customer service, how to fit people for gear and make recommendations. Kate was a good teacher, patient but demanding, and she seemed to understand without asking that Morgan was rebuilding from something. You remind me of someone, Kate said one day while they were unpacking a shipment. A guy I knew in the service. Came back different, couldn't fit into the world anymore. Ended up in the mountains somewhere, last I heard. Morgan's hand stilled on the box she was opening. What happened to him? Don't know, lost touch, but I hope he found what he was looking for. Kate looked at her directly. You running from the same kind of thing? Similar. Different details, same result. Well, you're doing better than he did. At least you're trying to rebuild instead of just hiding. The words stuck with Morgan through the long nights alone in her studio. Was that what Caleb was doing? Just hiding? Or had he genuinely found peace on that mountain, the way he claimed? She wanted to believe it was the latter, but some part of her suspected it was the former. Still, it wasn't her place to save him. He'd been clear about that. Weeks became months. Morgan got better at the job, started teaching workshops on winter survival skills. People responded to her direct approach, her obvious competence, the way she treated them like adults capable of learning. She made friends slowly. Other outdoor enthusiasts, people who valued self-reliance and didn't ask invasive questions. She dated briefly, but nothing stuck. The men she met were fine, pleasant, occasionally interesting, but none of them had Caleb's understanding of what she'd survived. None of them had his quiet strength, his refusal to coddle, his way of making her bigger instead of smaller. She tried not to compare them. Mostly failed. 6 months after arriving in Ridgemont, Kate offered her a partnership in the shop. Business is growing, Kate said over coffee one morning. I need someone I can trust to help run things, someone who gets what we're trying to do here. You interested? Morgan stared at her. I've only been here 6 months. And in 6 months, you've increased our winter gear sales by 40%, brought in a dozen new customers through your workshops, and proven you can handle everything I throw at you. Kate smiled. I don't need years of experience. I need someone reliable who knows their shit. That's you. I don't have capital to invest. We'll work out a payment plan. You can buy in over time. Kate leaned forward. I'm serious about this, Morgan. You've got something special. Don't waste it working for someone else when you could be building something of your own. It was the opportunity Morgan had been working toward without realizing it. A chance to build something real, something lasting, something that was entirely hers. Yes, she said, I'm in. They shook on it, and Morgan felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was hers. This was the life she'd chosen instead of the one that had been chosen for her. But at night, alone in her studio with Caleb's compass on her nightstand, she still thought about the mountain, about a cabin where firelight flickered and silence was comfortable, about a man who'd taught her to value herself by refusing to rescue her. She wondered if he ever thought about her. On the 1-year anniversary of the day she'd run into the blizzard, Morgan closed the shop early and drove to the nearest mountain trailhead. The weather was clear, cold, but manageable. She hiked for 3 hours until she found a ridge, with a view that reminded her of Caleb's territory. She sat on a boulder, pulling out the compass and letting it rest in her palm. "Thank you," she said to the wind and the peaks, and the memory of someone who'd saved her by teaching her to save herself. "For everything. For the choice. For showing me I was worth fighting for." The wind carried her words away into the mountains, and Morgan wondered, hoped, maybe, that somewhere on a distant peak, a scarred man sat by his fire and felt the echo of her gratitude. But she didn't go looking for him, didn't try to find his cabin or make contact, because he'd been right. She'd needed to build this life alone, needed to prove to herself that she could stand without leaning on anyone, even someone who'd shown her how to be strong. Morgan stood, pocketed the compass, and started the hike back down. Tomorrow she'd open the shop again, teach another workshop, continue building the life she'd chosen. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, she thought about what might have been if Caleb had come down from his mountain, well, that was allowed. Some stories didn't get neat endings. Some people gave you exactly what you needed and asked for nothing back except that you use it well. Caleb Ridge had given her that gift. And Morgan West, who'd once been Evelyn Cross, who'd once believed her worth was determined by how well she pleased others, who'd run into a blizzard rather than accept one more moment of humiliation, was using it every single day. The mountains stood eternal against the winter sky, holding their secrets close. Somewhere in those peaks, a cabin weathered another storm. Whether anyone sat by that fire, whether they thought of her the way she thought of them, didn't change what mattered. She was free. She was strong. She was exactly who she'd chosen to become. And nobody, not her father, not Adrian, not fear or shame, or the weight of expectations, could ever take that away again. Morgan drove back to Ridgemont as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She had a business to run, classes to teach, a life to live. She'd survived the breaking point. She'd survived the mountain. She'd survived becoming someone new. And that, all of that, was enough. It was everything.